Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. We've recently launched our Patreon page, which can be found at cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon. If you aren't familiar with Patreon, it's an easy way for those who are interested in this show to help out by simply pledging a small amount each month in sponsorship. Now that could be as little as $5 a month, which is about £3.80, or as much as you like. You will enable us to dedicate more time creating more content to help you, including videos, more blog posts, and even more shows. So if you can, head over to cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon and get involved. In this episode, we talk about the crazy buzz term Devops. What does it mean? Is it even a thing? Well, David Rael is here to explain more about it. Dave is the host of another podcast called The Developer on Fire. He is first and foremost a father of 3 wonderful children. He's also a husband, a podcaster, and software developer and architect. He delights in matters technical and in human interactions, and has come to the conclusion he's good with both machines and people, which is a very, very niche area, I think, for developers. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, James. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and talking to us today about what many see as a buzzword and nothing more.
It can be, right? I mean, there are a lot of interpretations on what DevOps means. I think if you ask 10 people, what it is that it means, you're probably going to get 11 or 12 different answers. So Some people probably even disagree with themselves on it.
Yeah. So on that, how do you define DevOps? What are the roles that make up this term?
Well, I think there's 3 ways that I think you can really look at it. And so I think those 3 things are role, like you said, right? But I think there's kind of this idea of a named practice that we can say, hey, we are doing DevOps, whatever that means, right? So there's the role, the named practice, and then there's the concept that I think is really the meat of what DevOps is. And I think that that concept is really defined by it's a worldview. It's about a way of stepping into the perspective of each other. I'm old enough to have gone back to a time when we used to have dev teams and ops teams, and I think there's a lot less of that today because of the DevOps movement and some of that stuff. But we had kind of this set of people that would be on one side of the building and a set of people on the other side of the building, right? And there are developers and there are operations, and there were varying degrees of having cooperative collaboration between these people, and at the same time having some antagonistic kinds of things, right? There's the 3 a.m. call where the developer or where the operations person gets paged and they're dealing with something and they don't know how to fix it, and so they're calling in developers, and in the aftermath of this thing, trying to figure out what happened, right? There's a lot of finger pointing, right? You shouldn't have had to have called me. You should have been able to solve that yourself, and then it's, you should have given me a better document to be able to handle that thing. And, it's kind of this back and forth and blame game going on. And I think that DevOps is really the idea of, we can apply more of a developer mindset to operations at the same time that we can apply more of an operations mindset to development. And with those things going on together, and then just the amazing tools that have exploded really in the last decade to make things a lot easier, it enables that developers can do operations stuff and operations people can do development stuff. And we kind of get this, the lines blur a little bit about who's what. And I think that to me is really the concept of what DevOps is that there are things that need to be done, and not to the point where we are interchangeable cogs in a machine, but that I can apply my skill set to be able to go and do some of the things that need to be done. And I think that's what's exciting about it, is that it takes away some limitations, kind of in that same way that, my bio talks about being good with machines and with people, right? I've spent a majority of my life not believing that. And that's kind of one of the things that has been a recurring theme on my podcast, is that I always thought I was good with machines, not good with humans. And one of the lessons learned from the podcast is, you know what, I'm better with people than I thought I was. And so I think the same way with kind of the operations thing of making sure my application is running in production the same way that it runs on my development machine, getting rid of the works on my machine phenomenon when somebody reports something not going as expected, right? That's really what DevOps is all about.
Sure. So I guess it's sort of an expansion on something that I know is more prevalent in the American sort of like workforce. It's not something that we often see here in the UK. Here in the UK, you very much get, this is my job and this is what I do, and I don't do anything outside of that. So if I'm a developer, I do development stuff. I don't do the releases. I don't do this. I don't do that. Whereas the current role that I'm in at the moment, we've got some new management in place, and they're Americans, and they've come in and they've brought the ethos into this company that is, you should be able to do the job above you and below you, but this is sort of spreading it out a little bit, and it's being able to do the job to the left of you and to the right of you as well.
Yeah, I think that's the way that I would view it, is that being able to do those jobs is, there was a great quote, and I can't remember who it was or really how it went, but there's this long string of, a human being should be able to change a diaper and, and rotate tires and all of this list of all of these crazy disparate things. It says specialization is for insects, right? It's kind of the punchline of the thing. And I think, yeah, that to me is my way of looking at things, is that you are a whole professional, and just because you think that you're good at one thing doesn't mean you can't be good at something else. And really, you're more valuable to an organization when you have a lot of things to bring to bear.
Yeah, definitely. Now, in the past, I've had roles where I was the developer, the dev lead, the IT manager, the infrastructure guy, the database guy, the release manager, the tester. Now, this is when I was working in very small companies, and in my experience, small companies, that is pretty commonplace. So it is that DevOps, but just without the pay and out the name?
I think it really is. In small companies, I call it the phenomenon that I am the IT department, right? Which, I think that is kind of the thing that needs to be done in small companies, is you wear a lot of hats, is kind of the way the old saying goes. And I think that is what DevOps is, right? You may be a developer, but you have to know something about how to, run your machines, how to set up the production environment, how to maintain those things, right? How to deploy and test and all of that stuff. So I mean, yeah, that is really the essence of what DevOps is all about. I think that is absolutely the essence of DevOps.
So why is DevOps suddenly a buzzword on people's tongues? Is it just a term so people can charge more money, or is it something that's pushing businesses in a certain way to, I don't know, maybe realize that these people in their companies are doing more than what they thought they were doing?
Yeah, I think there might be something to that idea of charging more money, but I don't really look at it that way. And I don't typically see a lot of people who are really just trying to use that moniker to make money. I think the thing that really makes it a thing now is the proliferation of tooling that has come up. I think especially cloud computing and containers. And the container tooling that we have available now with things like Docker, right? That just enable making it so easy to do things with setting up these lightweight processes that are essentially machine environments, and the repeatability and all that stuff, and then container orchestration, right? I think it's really that's what it is that being that DevOps person, that I am the IT department in a small business, meant you were working really hard.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a thing now because you can be that person without having to pull your hair out, because tools make things so much easier, and especially with cloud computing, right? That I can set up infrastructure as a developer without having to deal with physical hardware. It's all stuff that I can script and deal with, command line interfaces and APIs for the various cloud providers, and it really makes it straightforward that you can use code to manage your infrastructure. So the ability to be a developer who's controlling all of these things, it's just so accessible in today's world. Whereas 5-10 years ago, that was much less the case.
Yeah, I can see that point, and I think the lines between the infrastructure guys and the developers and the operation, that is very much blurring, because I'm from a .NET background, and even now when you open .NET and you create a new project, it has, do you want Docker support? Which might as well say, do you want to be able to just publish this and it's out there, and you don't need to do anything on the hardware. We'll deal with that for you. It's all so much simpler to get that stuff up and running.
Yeah, even without Docker, right? Even before the Docker support in Visual Studio, there was published directly to Azure, or ways to deploy to IIS on a remote machine or some of those things, right? To get this thing off of my machine and get it working somewhere else. What's really neat about things like Docker is the repeatability of it, the bringing so much closer to the way that I'm running on my development box to what's happening in production, right? When I think about my old timer status, and I can think back to what it was like to have machines that we had to, the moniker, the saying that people are saying these days in the world of DevOps is, to treat your servers like cattle rather than like pets, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way of looking at it. Going back to times when we really didn't have the tooling to make that an easy option, when those servers were pets, the pain associated with trying to set up a new piece of infrastructure was daunting, not only because of the physical need to set up servers and all of that stuff, and the need for people who were skilled in those kinds of things, but also that machine that's been out there in production for 2 years has had a whole lot of things done to it, right? And there are a lot of, that there's been somebody on that machine who changed some configuration somewhere, and it's integral to making the thing work, because there was some 3 a.m. emergency call, some outage where we had to do something to get the thing back up and running, and nobody ever documented or got that into into some kind of standardized procedure for setting up a new server. And so now when we're trying to set up a new server, we've got to figure out all of those things. And in a Docker world, or in an Amazon machine image, or any of those kinds of things, right, where you are just spinning up something from this image or from this script, then it's so repeatable. And when you treat your servers like cattle, right, there's a reason that's good, and it is that then you're not dealing with that, oh my goodness, how do I get this new machine into that state that I don't know what all these things are that have been done to this machine. So I think that's really why that is, and I think I forgot what the question was or what we were talking about there, but I went down on this tangent of that. That's really what things like Docker and virtualization in general, right? Even broader and more fundamental than containers, is that it just enables that ability to just blow it away and spin up a new one.
Yeah, it's it is fantastic, and I think one of the big jobs that I often do when I go into companies is that I look at their current systems, try and find out what they do, what they're doing not so well, and how they're running, and come up with processes to move them into stuff like Amazon or Azure, or even across to other physical boxes. And with this new DevOps movement, with everything being scripted, I can see the role that I'm playing changing quite considerably, because at the moment I do a lot of forensic IT, I guess you'd call it, where we've got, say, software that developers don't know about that's running the business, that I'll dive onto their servers that they say that the application is running on, find out what's actually running, and then try and trace back to find all the dependencies, find out as many as I can, spin up a new box somewhere, because we can just spin up a box. We don't have to wait for somebody in the data center to go and slide in a new system into a rack. Dump everything on there, and then it goes, oh no, I can't run because you're missing something, and doesn't quite tell you what it is, and then a bit more digging through error logs and Windows logs and stuff, and you find out, oh, they were using something that was installed on the system that's not supposed to be used in this way, but they're using it that way.
Yep.
And then you put that on there, and, oh yeah, it all works. But with being able to script stuff, it just gets rid of that real problems, to put it a nice way. I was gonna use another term, but yeah, the aggravation of that.
Absolutely, yeah, and it gets to the point where that it used to be that either a QA person or or somebody dealing with the application in production or some of those things report, here's how the thing's working, and that works on my machine phenomenon comes because the developer says, hey, I can't reproduce this issue, and often that's an environmental thing, one of those things that's not installed on another box that's actually running on the developer's machine. And when the developer says, hey, I'm running this thing in a container on my machine that is the same container image that's that's being instantiated as a container that's running on that production box or that test environment or wherever it is that somebody else is seeing an image, well, now I'm a lot closer to being able to actually reproduce that problem because I don't have so many of these variables that are just getting in the way, and I can find the signal instead of just having all of this noise to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. And does every team need DevOps, or are they still able to trundle along at the moment in the more traditional developers operations and things like that? Or do they need it? Should they be looking to bring on a DevOps contingency?
Well, I would say that it depends mostly on what we mean by the term. I kind of talked about that there are these three different ways of looking at the DevOps term. I think as a role, right? Do you need a person that you call DevOps? I'd say no. In most cases, you don't really need that person because if you are embracing DevOps in kind of the sense of the concept of what I like to call a kind of an empathetic kind of way of dealing with one another in dev and ops and that kind of thing. And I kind of think about it like a marriage, right? When I think about what it means to be a partner with my wife, right? There are a lot of things that I prefer, that I care about, that really don't matter that much to her, and likewise things that she cares about that I don't. And when I take on this attitude of, well, that's your thing, but but I don't care, that kind of drives a wedge in the relationship. And when I have an attitude of, if it matters to you, then it matters to me, I think that takes our ability to relate to another level. So the mindset of, hey, I'm going to look at this from the perspective of an operations person if I'm a developer, right? From the perspective of a QA person if I'm a developer, or any of these kinds of things, and likewise for these other people, right? And really this if it matters to you, it matters to me, kind of worldview works best when it is reciprocal and we're all trying to step into each other's shoes and apply these kinds of things, right? If you look at DevOps as that kind of a thing, then I'd say absolutely everybody needs that. Everybody needs that attitude in their operation. If they, it depends on what the word need means as well, right? I mean, you can operate, you can function without that, but I think if you want to be optimal in the way that you're working with your team, then by all means, yes, that attitude needs to be there. That concept of that I'm applying what I know about development and taking that into the realm of how we deal with operations, and and likewise applying what I know about operations to development and making my development machine setup repeatable in ways that an operations person would know how to do, right? Those kinds of things. By all means, that is absolutely needed in organizations, and I think we'd all be better if we approach it from that way of doing it. So I think that also is kind of there's a feedback mechanism here, that if everybody is approaching their business in that way, then that need for having a dedicated, hey, this is a DevOps person, becomes a lot diminished, because now we all become DevOps people. So I think having a dedicated DevOps person can be a boon to the way that you work, especially when they're focused on these things that are typically associated with DevOps, the continuous integration and continuous deployment and repeatability and all that kind of stuff. But I think the ideal situation is that everybody on the team has some expertise in that and is growing expertise in that.
Yeah, and I think that analogy you used there of it being a marriage and people having to care about what other people in the relationship care about is amazing. I might actually just take that snippet out and show it to the wife and say, look, this is what you need to do. Because on multiple occasions I've shown her stuff. I worked on a credit card printing touchscreen kiosk years ago, and I showed it to her after working on it for weeks and weeks. I went, watch. Pressed the button on the touchscreen and it printed this credit card. And she went, oh, is that all it does? And I was like, yeah, but the beauty is that it's that simple. All you did was touch the button. And she just sort of stared at me and walked off. So having that appreciation is definitely something she needs to start doing.
Yeah. At the same time that when my wife tells me about what she did with some preschool kids and how that made a difference, and I think about, oh, that little thing that you did, right? But she's got this insight into what a big difference that can make for that kid and their development.
Oh yeah.
And I think that if I listen to my wife about childhood development kinds of things, well, then I can gain some perspective on how I can apply that even to development, right? That everything's related in ways that are not obvious, right? So, yeah, I think that certainly being able to get that from your partner is a big deal, and it helps a lot. But I think when we say oh, you should be seeing more about these things that I care about, well, that rings hollow if we're not also saying, and at the same time, I'm seeing more in the things that you care about.
Yeah, and I've worked in places where the developers do their tickets, they do their changes, and they're thrown over the fence to the testers.
Yeah.
Once the testers are done with it, they throw it over the fence to the operations guys or whoever is there, the release manager, and it just goes that way. And I've always tried to get them to work closer together, and I've never really put that together and sort of thought, what I'm doing here is actually getting people to work in one sense of the word of DevOps, which seems to be what you're saying it actually is.
Yeah, that's my way of looking at it anyway. There's probably a lot of people who would say some different things, but yeah.
Yeah, well, everyone's got an opinion, but everybody's right.
For sure.
So because it in the instance that we're talking about it here, it covers a lot of different roles. Does that mean that it could be potentially replacing those roles? Will we see the disappearance of operations guys, of testers, of release managers, that sort of thing?
I think the simple answer to that is no. That there's still a reason to have operations guys and some of those things. I think that you can look at that a lot of ways. And in most of the operations that I'm working in now, there aren't really dedicated operations. I'm overloading that term there. In most of the organizations that I'm dealing with now, there aren't dedicated operations teams. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think using cloud does replace a lot of your operations department. But really, when you think about it, it's really more a matter of outsourcing operations to Amazon or Microsoft or Google or Linode, that rather than being that those roles have gone away. They're just being congregated in these large players who are providing that as a service to everybody all over the world. So I think it's still a no, because there's still somebody that's dealing with the servers, right? I mean, that's the first thing I think about in operations is racking and stacking and dealing with all the physical stuff and all of those things. And of course, operations is not limited to that. I actually really like a way of looking at DevOps. Rob Richardson, who you've had on the show, right?
Yeah.
Who is a mutual connection that we have, and He's a really neat guy. He talks a lot about Docker. And I had him, I did this remote conference event where I had a bunch of talks, a bunch of presenters and question and answer sessions and all of that stuff. And Rob did a talk about Docker in that. And he talked about the social change that Docker brings about, which I think is kind of a surprising thing, right? I mean, Docker is this technical concern, but it's also kind of it's one of the things he said about social change, and there's a lot to say about it. And the talk is available in my, I kind of turned the remote conference into a package that I'm calling "Develop Yourself" to develop your career, and so that's available if people want to check that out. But the talk was awesome, and one of the aspects of social change was a delineation of responsibilities between dev and ops, which I think is a little bit in contrast to what I'm saying about that there's a blurring of the lines. But Rob was talking about that when you've got containers that are doing the things that you need for your application, then the developer has responsibility for what's happening inside of that container, and they're building that thing up in a repeatable way. And operations has responsibility for what's happening outside of the container. So if you're using a container orchestration service in the cloud, then your operations department is that cloud provider. Right. If you have some on-premise or some of those things, or if you have some operations group that is managing your virtual infrastructure or whatever that looks like, right, they're still responsible for making sure that those containers are able to run and that there's a stable platform for them and all of that stuff. So that stuff's not going to go away. It might just be a question of who is the employer of the people who are doing that stuff.
Sure. And I suppose for people that aren't doing anything close to this, I think what one relatable example of this that I can think of is I've had discussions with test teams in the past that have all been very much manual testers. And when I've talked to them about automated testing, they get very defensive. They don't want to do automated testing. They don't want automated UI testing and code testing, and because they feel that it's going to take their jobs. What, in fact, it's actually going to do, for the most part, is make their jobs easier, but it's going to change their jobs. There's still going to be a need for a tester, like there's still going to be like you've said, a need for the operations guy. It's not going to take away everything.
Yeah, Janet Gregory was on Developer on Fire, and she made a distinction that I thought was really neat. She talked about the difference between a tester and a checker, right? And a checker is this more low skill kind of a thing where it's follow this script, do this input, expect this output, and just report, right? Is that the thing that happened, right? Which is really what your test runner in ReSharper or Visual Studio or from the command line is doing, right? Software is doing that job. And so, yeah, being a tester means that you are a programmer, right? In the same way of DevOps, right? I mean, we could call this dev test or test ops or some other goofy term that's bringing these things together, because really testers these days are programmers, and programmers are testers, right? I mean, you should be writing unit tests, and so lines blur, and so in this world that we have moved to and are moving toward, right, we've got to apply the skills that each other have, right? And developers should be thinking about all of those things that testers think about, all of those, how can I break this? What happens if I put in this crazy input? The old joke about a tester walks into a bar and orders a beer, orders 2 beers, orders 9999 beers, orders a lizard, right? That kind of thing, right? Developers can think about those things as well, and they're better developers when they do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but it is related. And having those lines blurring between the other roles and developers is such a poignant topic, because I've heard several developers over the years say that they don't want to do something. They don't like the fact that they don't like studying, and they see everyone else in IT having to learn new things, whereas they're quite happy just to click stuff. And it's like, yeah, but if you're not getting that, if you're not understanding that, then you're in the wrong industry, because you need to be learning every day, because things change, and it's not just changing around you, it's changing in the role that you do day to day. Even for a developer, our job changes day to day with all the technology that comes out. what I write today is probably going to be awful by tomorrow because something new will have come out, and it'll be a better way of doing what I wrote yesterday.
No question. Yeah. I mean, it used to be okay to be the antisocial person that sat in front of a keyboard and just banged away, right? Somebody slides the requirements and the pizza under the door and you're just gonna crank things out. And you can't do that anymore, right? That's not how it works anymore. And good for the industry, good for the world, good for our business experts, and good for us, right? And so I mean that's really, really related to this whole good with machines and good with people thing, right?
Yep.
You need to do that, right? I don't think this is something that I'm making up. That I've realized that, hey, I'm better with people than I thought I was. I think all of us need to realize that.
Yeah, definitely, and it's something that I'm getting there with as well. I had a conversation earlier this week with somebody. I was talking about what I did while I was in uni. I did about 7 years in retail. And I said that they should make retail compulsory, a bit like national service type thing, because it either makes you or breaks you. And before I did that, I was very shy, I was very retiring, I had no self-confidence at all, no self-esteem, and that brought it out of me. But then you become a developer and you don't really deal with people, you deal with code. And then over the years of being a developer, you move up through the ranks and start dealing with people again. And I found I really enjoy dealing with the people side of it as well as writing the code as well. So I think we've been on a very similar journey there, and I would imagine a lot of the listeners are on that journey as well, if not already completed it and know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, or they're about to be on that journey if they aren't already.
Yeah, definitely. So we've talked about some of the benefits there of DevOps and what DevOps is, but to be cynical about it, what are some of the drawbacks? Because there has to be some, right?
Well, I think if you become a DevOps focused developer rather than just a general developer, it can take you away from getting immersed in the domain of the business that you're dealing with, which I think some developers might say, "Oh, yay, that's a good thing." But I think it makes you a little bit less of a well-rounded person, right? And it makes you a little bit disconnected from what is the actual value. Why does this organization even exist at all? So I think there is a potential that if that's your focus and you're only DevOps, then you're kind of losing a little bit of connection to the ecosystem and some of those things. So I think that's something to be careful about as far as DevOps the role. I think as far as kind of DevOps the mindset, it's really hard to put a finger on what are drawbacks, because I mean when I think about it, right? Frederick Brooks several years ago, right, in that famous essay about the silver bullet, right? There is no silver bullet, no technique or technology that is going to produce an order of magnitude increase in productivity, simplicity, reliability. I don't remember exactly how he put that, but when I think about what cloud computing has done, when I think about containerization, these kinds of things, I think if those things are not silver bullets, if those aren't order of magnitude benefit, they're close, right? So it's pretty hard to say, hey, there's a real obvious downside to a DevOps mindset, especially in a context of, hey, it's about empathy, it's about social change and how we deal with each other, and that hey, instead of giving to the operations person a Word document that's describing how to run the system, instead I'm giving them a script that runs the system. There's a lot there that is all good, and there's really not a whole lot of bad, right? I mean, if you like getting called at 3 a.m, then I suppose you could look at that as a downside. But I think there's really more downside in the potential for being disconnected from the actual domain of your business if you're focusing only on DevOps.
Yeah. So we've talked about a few different versions of what DevOps means. Are there any tools that are specific to DevOps, or is it just about CI, CD, deployment and delivery, and automated testing, or is there more to it than that? Is there a tool set that you promote that you should say every DevOps guy or girl should be using?
I would say fundamentally it's about more than tooling. It's really at its root it's about empathy, but that manifests in tooling, right? And I think it is tooling that has enabled this revolution, right? Especially the cloud and especially Docker. And so I'd say, to that developer guy or girl or operations person that is out there that wants to know what they need to know, you should be getting familiar with Docker if you're not already, because it is the way of the world going forward. And if not Docker, some set of tooling around containerization is absolutely critical to being able to make manifest these things about getting rid of the works on my machine phenomenon, about being able to, when this is another Rob Richardson thing, right? I keep talking about him, but in his talk actually it was in the question and answer session related to his talk at my remote conference, he said something that just blew my mind, and I'm prepared with that here. I have the quote here. So this was what Rob said when I asked him a question about documentation, and so does this, I've had all these experiences with operations group where it's, here's the document that tells you what you need to know about running this thing, and of course those are always inadequate, right? And so Rob said, we're never going to get away from documentation, but I would argue that documentation now specifies less about what and more about why. My Docker file will specify the what, and everyone associated with my container can go look at the Docker file associated with it, either based on the metadata that I put into the container or just looking at the history of the commands that built that container, and they can see exactly how that container was built, and so the what is solved. The why is not, and we'll still need documentation for that, but the why is a whole lot easier to document. End quote there. So that was Rob, and that to me was yes, right? Historically, I didn't ever document those. Here's why we made these decisions that we did. Here's the business problem that we're trying to solve. Here's the actual motivation for why this system exists at all. And that was because I was so busy trying to, for one, implement the system, and two, right, write the document so that the operations person could know enough to be able to reproduce this system in the environment, right? With Docker tooling, right, that enables that now I can give them a script that does all of that what, and now that's going to free me up to be able to do some of that explanation of why and to understand why myself. Right. So I think that really is something that these kinds of tools enable. And I don't know that I'm still on the question. Right. We were talking about tooling and preferred tools, but I think that the repeatability that you have with tools like Docker, I think that's really the answer to this thing. That if it's not Docker, then something, whatever's the next thing that's replacing Docker, and then the orchestration around containers with things like Kubernetes and that kind of stuff. Sure. Those things are indispensable tools going forward.
Yeah, and we've talked quite a bit there about Rob Richardson, and if you haven't listened out there to the episode that Rob was on, it was episode 64, and it was Docker for All was the title of the episode, and myself and I are in talks with Rob at the moment to try and put together a mini series about Docker, and we're trying to sort of thrash out what we're going to do with it and where we're going to take it. But I think the premise behind it is getting it set up, getting a project running it in Docker, and deploying it, sort of thing. Because I have Docker running on my laptops. I use it in a little bit of an odd way. On my MacBook Air that is boot camped into Windows, it's not got the best amount of resource. So I've actually got SQL running in a Docker instance that I turn off. And when I need to use SQL, I turn it on, and that runs up, and it gets rid of that resource hog that is SQL on the MacBook. But that's not really how you should be using it. So I'm misusing it for what I am seeing as a good utilization of it. But I haven't used it yet for actually putting an application into. And I want to take you guys out there on that journey with me learning how to actually use that properly.
That's great. Yeah, I had a guest on my podcast, Laurence Bradford, who learned to code with me. I think is the name of her site, or something along those lines. And it's that same attitude of I don't know everything there is to know. Go with me on that journey. And I think there's really something just appealing about that position, right? That we're in this thing together. We're learning along that path. So I think that's really cool. And I think that use case that's not really necessarily a non-canonical use case, right? I mean, I do similar things with, if I want to run, say, a TeamCity build server or Jenkins or something like that, right? I can just pull down pull down an image or a Redis instance, those kinds of things, right?
Yep.
You can just pull down a container and run that thing and have that resource there on your machine. Now, it's not necessarily all about conserving resources and some of those kinds of things, but the ability to easily deploy those things and bring it up and down and kill it and recreate and all of that kind of stuff, that's really among the things that Docker is all about.
Yeah, and the scripting of stuff is really exciting. I remember many years ago, in a role we were using cruisecontrol.net as our CI server, and if you like to be an XML hell, then that was definitely the place for you to be, because everything was set up with XML files, and in the end we managed to get the XML configuration for cruise control into version control with a project that monitored the cruise control config and would rebuild itself when we did any changes. So we were sort of heading down that scripted and version controlled path, because we could see the history of what the project looked like going back in time through version control. But I'm glad the tooling's come on quite a lot since then, and cruisecontrol.net was fabulous. I loved it, but it did take a lot of effort to set it up, and I haven't looked at it for years, so it could be much better. I don't know. I don't want to dog on it too much.
Well, it was certainly a step forward in its time, and yeah, likewise, I don't know whatever came of that, whether it even still exists, but yeah, it was a step forward and really set the stage for things like Jenkins that are now just so fully featured and so amazing. And TeamCity is my preference, but you really can't go wrong with any of the modern build servers that that do the things that they do, and then other offerings like GoCD and some of that kind of stuff that just do those same things and make your build and deployment and making available of things like packages and images and all of those kinds of things, make it just so straightforward to set that stuff up.
Yeah, definitely. So the term DevOps is often bandied about with Agile, and we've said already that DevOps, I guess, in a way, like the term Agile, it's more of a state of mind. It's a set of possibilities of how you work that more than a hard and fast set of rules. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are a set of tasks that you do within DevOps: planning, creating, verifying, testing, releasing, configuring, monitoring, all that sort of stuff. Do you need to do all of them to consider you're saying that you do DevOps, or can you just do some of them and be able to say I do DevOps?
Well, first, I really like that comparison, right? I mean, Agile has come to mean so many things, and even more so than DevOps. You don't really know what somebody means when they say Agile anymore. And if you read the Agile Manifesto, and it's emphasizing, people over processes, and most of what you hear from people about Agile is all about processes. It's yeah, it really has gone far afield. But more directly to the question, when I was a younger person, I used to be a person of faith, and I'm really not anymore. But I grew up in the Catholic Church and those things, and we used to talk about cafeteria Catholics, right? That there's all of this dogma and things, and the cafeteria Catholic mindset was that you could pick and choose these things and still be a person of faith, but there are some portions of the teachings, right? And
Yep.
there's the difference between dogma and discipline and those kinds of things, and what's indispensable to truly being a Catholic. I think that's a really apt analogy to DevOps, and I think that yes, you can make it your own. You can choose your own flavor, and if you are doing continuous integration but not necessarily continuous deployment, well, I think it's open to your interpretation of what you want to call DevOps. To me, if you've got the mindset where I'm trying to apply what I know about ops to dev and applying what I know about dev to ops, to me, go ahead, go ahead and apply that moniker. I think it really, in this world where terms can mean just about anything, we've really got to have conversations to know what anybody's talking about anyway. So, the term that you apply to it's not going to really mean much one way or another. And we need to sit down and talk about it like we have here to really know what anybody's talking about anyway.
Yeah. I can see this becoming a term like Agile, and me having conversations with other people in a business along the same sort of lines. And I quite regularly find myself coming up against people who say, I thought they were doing Agile here. And I say, my answer to them is, yeah, but what is Agile? You tell me what you think Agile is, and I will tell you if they're doing Agile or not, because it's so different, depending on the circumstance, depending on what they're trying to achieve. And I guess it's going to be the same for DevOps.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked about the good things about it, the possible drawbacks, and a bit of the ethos around that. If I want to get more into DevOps and learn a little bit more on the topic, do you have any resources, any links or anything that you would suggest people go and have a look at to learn more?
That's a difficult question because I would suggest listening to Rob, right? I think is something that's kind of come up here a little bit. His talks about Docker are really insightful about the going deeper on Docker than just here are the things that you can do from the command line to create an image and to instantiate an image into a container. But the idea that, hey, this is social change, and that the way that operations and developers deal with each other is never going to be the same because of what this tooling enables. I think listening to that message is a big deal. So the social change that is Docker from Rob Richardson, I think is a great place to go, and that's available in my Develop Yourself package if people are interested in that. Beyond that, it's hard. I don't. There are so many resources out there. I think Pluralsight subscriptions. I don't know specifically any courses that are out there about DevOps specifically. I think if you want to learn about Kubernetes, then there's some great courses that I've consumed on there. The names of instructors are escaping me at the moment, but and Docker itself as well. There's learning tools. There, video training I think is my favorite way of getting into that stuff. So I think Pluralsight is a great place to go for that kind of stuff. But I don't think I have any really good answers for that beyond human interaction, right? Just getting better at listening to the people around you, taking a little more time to try to view things from their perspective. I think that is a DevOps principle that gets overlooked a lot.
Yeah, definitely. The softer skills, the softer side of being an IT person, and I know plenty of developers that could definitely benefit from some aid with their soft skills.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll go even further than that and say that every human being could be better at their soft skills.
Oh, yeah.
So, yes, we developers are notorious for having problems with that. And in some ways, that's not justified, but in a lot of ways it is, right? And I think, a lot of that is self-imposed, right? We think we're not good with people, and that's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think, you said it before, that kind of just a feeling of confidence goes a long way. And I think, hey, start a podcast. Maybe that's another good way to get better at DevOps, right? Because that will help you to be able to connect with people better.
You've given away my secret. Given away it. That was the whole premise for starting this podcast, was to learn a little bit more by being able to talk to all these people who are more intelligent than me, know more on individual topics than I do, and you've just blown my cover. So thanks.
Absolutely. Oh, you know what? There's one resource too that I wanted to mention that I'm forgetting about, but it's not directly related to DevOps. But Tom Preston Werner wrote this blog post called "The Git Parable." That it's not about DevOps, but it's a narrative story about what Git is. And I think when we look at tooling, when we look at the things we do and we really get into the why of what we're doing, then that blog post, that story that he told about Git is so valuable. It doesn't tell you how to use Git, but it tells you about why Git exists and why it does what it does and some of those kinds of things. So I think I recommend really anybody who's interested in any of this stuff, read that blog post. It's not going to tell you anything about DevOps, but it's going to give you an example for using stories to express what's going on, and more importantly than what's going on, but the why that things are the way they are. So that's I think another resource for just getting into the mindset.
Awesome, and I think that's a great place to end today's show. I will include a link to your Develop Yourself kit. I'll put the link to the Git Parable in the show notes as well. But thank you for coming on and talking to us about DevOps. It's definitely cleared up a few of my questions and that I had around it, and I think I can go and answer the questions for some other people when they've asked me about it. I can go back to them and say, actually, I have an answer now. I know.
Nice.
So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, you're welcome, James, and thank you as well. This has been a really enjoyable experience for me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you to you guys and girls out there in Listenerland. You've been listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to David Rael talking about DevOps. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.